Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey back in time, not to a cozy armchair history lesson, but right into the dusty, blood-soaked sandals of a Roman soldier. Imagine standing there, in the biting wind of a distant frontier, your stomach churning with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. You can almost feel the rough wool of your tunic against your skin, smell the sweat and leather of your comrades, and hear the distant, rhythmic pounding of 1,000 marching feet. This isn't just about dates and battles. It's about what it felt like to be a cog in the greatest war machine the ancient world had ever seen. You'll trudge, sweat, and fight alongside these legendary warriors. And honestly, you probably won't survive the week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey, should you choose to accept it, begins not with glory, but with the mundane reality of recruitment. You're likely a young man, perhaps barely out of your teens, with dreams of adventure or simply the desperate need for a steady income. The Roman legion offers both. Though the adventure is often more brutal than romantic, you'd stand before a recruiting officer, a grim-faced centurion perhaps, who'd eyeball you for strength, stature, and a general lack of obvious infirmities. No real physicals like today, just a quick once-over. Historians still argue whether the standard height requirement of around 5'8" was strictly enforced or often overlooked in times of great need. If you were deemed fit, you'd be given a small sum of money, a kind of enlistment bonus, and then your new life would begin. No going back now. There's a quirky tidbit about Roman training. Sometimes they'd use dummies filled with sand or straw to simulate the feel of striking a human body, which is a rather grim form of early martial arts practice. Isn't it? This wasn't about fancy swordplay. It was about efficient, deadly movements designed to overwhelm an opponent quickly. Every legionary was taught the same core techniques, creating a unified, predictable, and incredibly effective fighting force. You weren't a soloist. You were a note in a vast, deadly symphony. And as you collapsed onto your hard pallet at night, your body screaming in protest, you'd begin to understand that the greatest enemy in the Roman army wasn't always the barbarians. Sometimes, it was just the sheer, relentless physical toll of daily life. You'd also quickly learn the importance of your tent mates, your contubernium, a group of 8 men who lived, trained, and fought together. These were the men who would literally watch your back as you slowly, painfully adjust to the brutal routine. Your attention turns to your gear. This isn't some quick shopping trip to the Roman equivalent of a military surplus store. Every piece of equipment is meticulously crafted and essential to your survival. First, there's your tunic, typically wool, often red, keeping you warm in the chill and relatively cool in the sun. Over that, you don your lorica segmentata, that iconic segmented plate armor that makes Roman soldiers look so formidable. Imagine the weight, probably around 20 pounds of iron plates, hinged and strapped together. It's heavy, noisy, and a bit of a pain to put on. But it offers incredible protection against slashing blows, getting used to the feeling of it. The way it restricts your movement just enough to remind you it's there is part of the daily struggle. You'd also have a simpler lorica hamata chainmail or lorica squamata scale armor depending on your unit and the period. But the segmentata is what truly screams Roman legionary. Historians still argue whether the lorica segmentata was truly superior to chainmail in all combat scenarios or simply cheaper and easier to mass produce, making it more common. Next, you strap on your belt, the cingulum militare, which isn't just for holding up your trousers. It's adorned with decorative metal plates, a status symbol of sorts. And from it hangs your gladius, the short, double-edged thrusting sword. This is your primary weapon, designed for close quarters, brutal efficiency. You don't swing it wildly like some movie hero. You thrust, you stab. You use its point to find gaps in an enemy's defense. It's surprisingly light for how deadly it is, and practicing with it until it feels like an extension of your arm is crucial. On your other hip, perhaps, or slung over your shoulder, is your pugio, a smaller dagger, a last-ditch weapon or a utilitarian tool for anything from cutting rope to opening a stubborn jar of fermented fish sauce. Every legionary knew the sound of their own gear, the creak of leather, the jingle of metal, and the subtle shift of the scabbard against your leg. It became part of your personal soundtrack. Then there's the scutum, your large curved rectangular shield. This isn't just a piece of wood and leather. It's your portable fortress. It's heavy, around 15-20 pounds, made of glued layers of wood, covered in linen and leather, and often reinforced with bronze. You'd carry it with your left arm, gripping the central boss. That metal knob in the middle, the scutum, is your lifeblood in battle. It protects you from arrows, spears, and sword blows, but it's also a weapon. You can bash an enemy with its edge, use it to shove, or lock it with your comrades' shields to form an impenetrable wall. Learning to move with it, to protect yourself and the man next to you simultaneously, is an art form. Imagine drilling with it for hours under the scorching sun, your arm aching, your shoulder screaming, but knowing that a moment's lapse could mean your life. Your offensive capabilities aren't limited to the gladius. You also carry 2 pila, heavy javelins. Each pilum has a long, thin iron shank designed to bend on impact, making it unusable by the enemy. You'd typically throw one as you charged, aiming to disable an enemy shield or impale a foe. Then use the second for another target or hold onto it if the first throw was a dud. The satisfying thud of a pilum hitting its mark, even in practice, must have been a grim reminder of their destructive potential. There's a quirky tidbit about the pilum. The thin iron shank wasn't just to bend. It was also designed to penetrate shields easily, once embedded. The bent shaft would make it incredibly awkward and heavy for the enemy to remove, effectively rendering their shield useless or forcing them to discard it. Finally, you have your calligi, hobnailed sandals. These aren't just footwear. They're designed for long marches, providing grip and durability. The hobnails, those small iron studs on the sole, gave excellent traction, even on rough terrain, and could even be used to stomp on an enemy's foot in a close-quarters struggle. Not exactly elegant, but effective. You'd also carry a pack with personal items, a small cooking pot, some rations, a pickaxe or shovel for digging, and maybe a leather water skin. All of this, perhaps 60-70 pounds in total, would be carried on your back, day in and day out. This wasn't just equipment, it was your entire world, meticulously designed for survival and conquest. It made you a walking arsenal, a self-sufficient unit, ready for anything the Empire demanded. Your life quite literally depended on every strap, every buckle, and every sharpened edge. With your gear now feeling like a second skin, albeit a heavy, chafing one, your days transform into an endless cycle of movement. This is the march, the very heartbeat of the Roman military machine. You're not just walking, you're covering miles, often 20 or more a day, under the blazing sun or through chilling rain, carrying that full pack. Imagine the grit of dust in your teeth, the constant ache in your feet from those hobnailed calligi, and the rhythmic creak of your lorica segmentata. It's a monotonous, grueling endurance test that never seems to end. You'd learn to fall into the cadence of the legion, the steady tramp of thousands of feet creating a low, rumbling drone that could be heard for miles. Conversations would be terse, often just grunts of shared misery, as you focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Every few hours, there might be a brief halt, just enough time to gulp down some water from your goatskin and readjust your pack, before the centurion's sharp command sends you forward again. Food on the march is simple, practical, and utterly unappetizing by modern standards. Think hardtack, dried meat, and grain that you'd grind yourself into a rough flour for porridge. Forget five-star dining. This is sustenance, pure and unadulterated. You'd learn to appreciate every crumb and every drop of water. There's a quirky tidbit here. Roman soldiers often carried their own small hand mill for grinding grain. meaning you were literally earning your bread with every step. Talk about a multi-purpose tool. But the march isn't just about putting one foot in front of the other. It's about strategic movement and constant vigilance. You're always aware of your surroundings, scanning the horizon for signs of trouble, listening for unusual sounds. Even a slight rustle in the bushes could be an ambush. The discipline instilled during training becomes vital here. Maintaining formation, even on the move, is paramount. You learn to trust the men around you, relying on their discipline as much as your own, because when you're caught off guard. A disciplined formation can be the difference between a minor skirmish and a full-blown massacre. As dusk approaches, the real work begins. You don't just stop and set up camp wherever you please. Roman legions were masters of fortified encampments, a skill that baffled and terrified their enemies. Every night, no matter where they were, they would construct a temporary but highly defensible fort. Known as a castra. You'd drop your pack, grab your shovel, and get to work. First, the perimeter would be marked out. Then a ditch, often V-shaped and several feet deep, would be dug around the entire camp. The earth from the ditch would be piled up to form a rampart, and on top of that, you'd help erect a palisade of sharpened stakes, carried by the legionaries themselves. That made up the defensive wall. Historians still argue whether the standardized layout of these camps, almost identical no matter where they were built, contributed more to efficiency or simply to psychological reassurance for the troops within this quickly constructed fortress. Your contubernium would set up your tent. These weren't spacious, luxury accommodations. They were small leather tents, each housing 8 men. You'd sleep shoulder to shoulder, finding what little comfort you could on the hard ground. The smell of sweat, unwashed bodies, and damp earth would be your nightly lullaby. Fires would be lit for cooking, but strategically placed to avoid revealing the camp's position unnecessarily. Sentries would be posted, their watchful eyes scanning the darkness beyond the palisade, even in sleep. You'd be half alert, a testament to the constant state of readiness. The constant threat wasn't just from human enemies. Disease was a far more insidious killer than any barbarian sword. Dysentery, malaria, camp fever. These invisible enemies decimated legions far more effectively than any pitched battle. Poor sanitation, crowded conditions, and a diet often lacking in fresh produce made the camps breeding grounds for illness. One of the grimmer jokes you might hear is that a Roman soldier's worst enemy wasn't a Gaul with a big axe, but a tiny amoeba in the water. Commanders understood this, to a degree, implementing basic hygiene rules like digging latrines away from water sources. But the scientific understanding of germ theory was millennia away. You'd see comrades sicken and die, not from a glorious wound on the battlefield, but from a relentless fever or a debilitating gut ailment. A stark reminder of the fragility of life, even within the mightiest army. And as you finally drift off to sleep, the distant howl of a wolf or the unsettling rustle of leaves outside the palisade would serve as a chilling reminder that you were always vulnerable. After the relentless march and the nightly ritual of camp construction, you might think a moment of rest is due. Think again. The Roman military machine was built not just on strength and organization, but on an uncompromising system of discipline. This wasn't merely about following orders. It was about instilling an unwavering obedience, a collective will that transcended individual fear or doubt. From the moment you woke, every action, every movement, was governed by a strict code. You'd march in perfect step, your gear pristine, your tent immaculate. Small infractions, like a scuffed helmet or a poorly tied sandal, could earn you a sharp rebuke from your centurion or a wearyingly familiar extra drill. Imagine standing at attention, the sun beating down, as a grizzled centurion inspects your lorica. He runs a finger over a spot of rust you missed, and suddenly you're doing 50 push-ups in full kit, or perhaps carrying an extra heavy log for the day's march. It wasn't about malice, it was about perfection, about ensuring that every man was a faultless part of the whole. This relentless pursuit of order extended to every aspect of camp life. Noise was kept to a minimum, particularly at night. Gambling was often forbidden, and drinking heavily could lead to severe consequences. You might joke quietly with your tent mates about the absurdity of polishing the inside of your helmet, but you'd still do it, because the alternative was far worse. Punishments ranged from the humiliating to the utterly brutal. For minor offenses, you might face public shaming, perhaps being forced to stand outside the camp, exposed to the elements, or endure extra duties like carrying more than your share of the camp equipment. One mainstream historical fact is the use of the fustuarium, a punishment reserved for desertion or gross insubordination. Imagine being surrounded by your fellow legionaries, who would then beat you to death with sticks and clubs if you were caught trying to flee, or if you fell asleep on guard duty. This wasn't a private affair. It was a public spectacle, designed to terrify and deter. The psychological impact of witnessing such a brutal display, knowing your comrades were literally instruments of justice, would be profound. Then there's the infamous decimation. This was the ultimate collective punishment, used when an entire unit, a cohort, or even a legion had shown cowardice, mutiny, or extreme failure. Historians still argue whether decimation was a regular occurrence or a rare, extreme measure, but its very existence speaks volumes about Roman discipline. Imagine your cohort, perhaps 480 men, standing in formation, their faces etched with dread. The centurions would then randomly select 1 out of every 10 men. Those chosen would then be beaten to death by their own comrades. You would be handed a stick, forced to participate in the execution of your fellow soldier, a man you had marched and trained with. This wasn't just a punishment for the dead, it was a psychological scar for the survivors, forging an unbreakable bond of fear and shared trauma. It's a grim reminder that in the Roman army, your life was not your own, and the greatest threat to your existence could sometimes come from within your own ranks. A quirky tidbit: the very word decimation comes from this practice, meaning to reduce by a tenth, though colloquially it's come to mean a drastic reduction. The logic behind such harsh measures, as chilling as it seems, was clear. Absolute discipline meant absolute reliability in battle. If a soldier feared his centurion more than the enemy, he would stand firm. If he knew the consequences of breaking ranks were worse than a barbarian's axe, he would hold his position. This constant pressure, this omnipresent threat of punishment, built an internal resolve that turned ordinary men into unyielding fighting units. It fostered a desperate reliance on the man next to you, because your survival literally depended on his adherence to the same unwritten, yet deeply understood, rules. And as you lay in your tent at night, listening to the murmurs of the camp, you'd reflect on the thin line between obedience and annihilation, a line rigidly enforced by the unyielding hand of Roman discipline. It was a harsh education, but one that ensured the legions remained the most formidable force on earth. After enduring the relentless physical and psychological demands of training and discipline, your body now moves with a practiced efficiency. You've learned to march as one, live as one, and soon you'll fight as one. This brings us to the very core of Roman military genius: the battlefield formations. Forget individual heroics in the Roman legion. It was all about the collective, about moving as a single, devastating entity. You are no longer just a man with a sword. You are a cog in a perfectly synchronized machine. The most basic formation, and the one you'd spend countless hours drilling, is the line abreast, or aces. Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, your scutum held firmly in front, its curve protecting your left flank and the right flank of the man next to you. This creates a solid wall of shields, bristling with the points of gladi. You'd typically be arranged in 3 lines, or triplex aces, with the younger, less experienced hastati in the front, the more seasoned principes behind them, and the veteran triarii in the rear, acting as a reserve. This depth allowed for continuous pressure, as fresh troops could relieve exhausted ones or plug gaps in the line. Historians still argue whether the triarii were truly a last resort, or if they saw more active combat than traditionally believed. When the enemy charged, or when you advanced, the formation would maintain its cohesion, a slow, inexorable push, the command to advance. Perhaps a trumpet blast or the bellowed orders of a centurion would ripple through the ranks. Your heart would pound in your chest, a primal drumbeat echoing the thunder of thousands of marching feet. You'd feel the collective tension, the shared surge of adrenaline, as you moved forward, shield locked with shield, a human wave of iron and resolve. But the Romans were not rigid. They had formations for every occasion, each designed to maximize their strengths and exploit enemy weaknesses. Perhaps the most famous, and certainly one of the most visually striking, is the testudo, or tortoise formation. Imagine your cohort, facing a hail of arrows or rocks from above, perhaps during a siege, on command. The men on the outer ranks would hold their scuda vertically, interlocking them to form a protective wall. The men in the interior ranks would then raise their shields over their heads, interlocking those to create a virtually impenetrable roof. You'd be moving forward under a shell of overlapping shields, impervious to anything but the heaviest projectiles. It's a slightly claustrophobic experience, moving in a box of your own making, relying completely on the men around you to keep their shields tight. You might joke that it's like a very slow, very heavily armored moving van, but a very effective one. A quirky tidbit: ancient sources sometimes suggest that legionaries could even march on top of a testudo in certain circumstances, though this is likely an exaggeration of its true stability. Another crucial formation was the orb, a defensive circle used when surrounded by a numerically superior enemy, or if a unit became isolated. Here, the men would form a tight circle, scuta outward, presenting a bristling perimeter in every direction. This allowed them to defend against attacks from all sides, holding their ground until reinforcements arrived or the enemy broke off. It's a desperate measure, born of necessity, where every man truly depends on the man beside him for survival. The training for these formations was relentless. You'd drill them repeatedly, in sunshine and rain, until the movements were instinctive. A centurion would bark orders, and you'd shift, turn, and interlock shields with practiced ease. The goal was fluidity, the ability to adapt to the chaos of battle without losing cohesion. Imagine the sheer discipline required to maintain a perfect line while missiles are raining down and barbarians are screaming at your face. It speaks volumes about the level of training and the psychological conditioning that Roman soldiers underwent. When you heard the command, you didn't think, you simply reacted. Trusting in the system, trusting in the man to your left and right, this collective strength, this seamless transition between defensive and offensive postures, was what made the Roman legion such an unstoppable force. Truly the envy and terror of the ancient world. The moment arrives, heralded by the thunderous roar of thousands of voices, the clang of metal on metal, and the chilling screams of the dying. You are no longer drilling, you are in the thick of it, experiencing the brutal, visceral reality of the clash of swords. This isn't the elegant dueling you might see in films. This is a chaotic, intensely personal, and utterly terrifying struggle for survival. As the lines close, the first thing you notice is the sound. It's overwhelming. The war cries of the enemy, the grunts of exertion from your comrades, the sickening thud of bodies hitting the ground, the desperate cries for help. It's a symphony of destruction. You raise your scutum, bracing for the impact, and then it hits. A barbarian, perhaps twice your size and covered in tattoos, slams into your shield. The impact jolts through your arm, sending a shockwave up to your shoulder. You push back, using the weight of your shield, driving your hobnailed caligae into the earth for leverage. This isn't just about strength. It's about balance and endurance. Your gladius is now your life. You don't swing it wildly, because that leaves you open. Instead, you thrust. You aim for the gaps in the enemy's defense: the belly, the groin, the neck, the exposed armpit. The Roman fighting style is often described as a stabbing technique, and it's brutally efficient. A short, sharp thrust has more penetrating power than a wide swing, and it requires less space. Perfect for the tight confines of a shield wall. You pull back, parry a desperate swing with the edge of your scutum, and thrust again, feeling the sickening resistance as your blade finds its mark. It's a dance of death, precise and deadly. Historians still argue whether the gladius was truly superior to the longer swords used by Celtic or Germanic tribes, or if it was the Roman discipline in using it that made the difference. The front rank, where you undoubtedly find yourself, is a maelstrom. Men are falling on both sides. You step over bodies, trying not to slip in the mud and gore. The air is thick with the metallic tang of blood and the smell of fear. You hear the sharp, encouraging shouts of your centurion, his presence a beacon of resolve amidst the chaos. He's right there with you, probably in the thickest part of the fighting, leading by example. He might even shove you forward if he sees you waver. A grim form of encouragement. You're constantly aware of the men to your left and right. Their shields are locked with yours, forming that impenetrable wall. If a man falls, you instinctively shift to cover the gap, knowing that any breach could lead to a catastrophic collapse of the line. The enemy will exploit any weakness, any hesitation. You might even use the boss of your scutum to bash an opponent's face, or perhaps stamp down with your caligae on their unprotected foot. A dirty but effective trick in close-quarters combat. A quirky tidbit about Roman combat is that they were sometimes trained to grab an opponent's beard or hair to expose their neck for a quick thrust. Not exactly chivalrous, is it? The battle ebbs and flows. Sometimes your line pushes forward, slowly gaining ground, grinding the enemy down with relentless pressure. Other times, the enemy surges, and you're fighting for every inch. Sweat stinging your eyes, muscles screaming with exhaustion. Your breath comes in ragged gasps, your throat raw from the dust and the effort. Time itself seems to distort. Moments stretch into an eternity. Yet the entire engagement can feel like a blur of desperate action. The key to Roman success wasn't brute strength, though that certainly helped. It was discipline, cohesion, and relentless aggression. You were trained to deliver repeated, short, sharp thrusts, exhausting your opponent while maintaining your own defensive posture. You were part of a system designed to wear down the enemy, to grind them into submission through sheer, unwavering pressure. And when the enemy line finally broke, when you saw them waver and then turn to flee, a surge of primal triumph would course through you, mixed with the grim satisfaction of survival. But even then, the danger wasn't over. A routed enemy could still turn, and the pursuit often led to more casualties than the initial clash. As the dust settled and the screams faded into groans, you'd stand amidst the carnage, chest heaving, gladius dripping, a survivor of the day's gruesome work. While the roar of steel on steel and the thrust of the gladius are often the images that define Roman combat, the legions were far more sophisticated than mere sword-wielding brawlers. You would quickly learn the devastating power of missile weapons and the intricate art of siegecraft, tools that allowed Rome to project its power across vast distances and overcome seemingly impenetrable defenses. Before the lines even closed for hand-to-hand combat, you, as a legionary, would unleash the terrifying potential of the pilum. Remember those heavy javelins you trained with. This is their moment to shine. As the enemy advanced, or as your line moved forward, the command would be given pila iacta, javelins throw, with a synchronized heave. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of these weighted projectiles would arc through the air, their iron shanks glinting in the sun, the sound of them whistling through the air, then the sickening thud as they slammed into enemy shields or bodies, would be a grim prelude to the main engagement. A well-aimed pilum could punch through a shield, or even through a man, effectively disabling an enemy before you even got close. The unique design, with its soft iron shank designed to bend on impact, meant that if it didn't kill or wound, it would at least make the enemy's shield unwieldy, forcing them to discard it and leaving them vulnerable. This wasn't just a ranged attack, it was a psychological weapon, shattering enemy formations and morale before the gladius ever came into play. Beyond the individual pilum, the Romans were masters of artillery. Imagine the sheer destructive power of a ballista, a giant crossbow-like machine capable of firing massive bolts with incredible force, or an onager, a massive catapult designed to hurl heavy stones or incendiary projectiles over vast distances. These weren't just simple machines. They were precision instruments, engineered by skilled Roman artisans and operated by dedicated artillerymen within the legion. You might be tasked with helping to transport the heavy components of these machines, or perhaps assisting in their assembly. The sight of a stone the size of a man's head arcing through the sky, destined to smash through an enemy wall, or a giant bolt capable of skewering multiple men, would be both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Historians still argue about the exact firing rate and accuracy of these ancient machines, but their psychological impact was undeniable. Then there's the systematic, often relentless, process of siegecraft. Roman sieges were not about rushing a wall head-on. They were about engineering, patience, and overwhelming force. If you found yourself besieging a city, your days would be filled with intense, back-breaking labor. You might be digging circumvallation lines, elaborate networks of ditches and ramparts surrounding the besieged city, designed to prevent supplies from reaching the defenders and to trap them inside. Or you could be constructing contravallation lines, an outer ring of defenses to protect the besiegers from any relief armies. It's a bit like building a second, much larger fort around the first. Only this time, you're the one on the outside looking in. You'd also be involved in building massive siege engines, siege towers, lumbering wooden structures that could be rolled right up to enemy walls, allowing legionaries to assault the battlements on the same level as the defenders, or battering rams. Immense beams tipped with metal, used to smash through gates and weaker sections of walls. Imagine the coordination required to move a multi-story siege tower, under enemy fire, across uneven ground. It was an engineering marvel, a testament to Roman ingenuity. A quirky tidbit about siegecraft is that Roman engineers sometimes used flexible tubes to pipe water underneath enemy foundations, trying to undermine walls and cause them to collapse. A subtle, almost sneaky form of siege. The constant barrage of missile fire, combined with the inexorable advance of siege engines, would slowly grind down the defenders' morale. The goal wasn't always a bloody direct assault. It was often to force a surrender through sheer attrition and psychological pressure. But if an assault became necessary, you'd be part of the desperate charge, perhaps using ladders to scale the walls, or fighting your way through a breached gate. The chaos of a city being stormed, the close quarters fighting in narrow streets, would be even more brutal than a field battle. But the meticulous planning and the overwhelming firepower of Roman missile weapons and siegecraft meant that resistance, in the face of such systematic destruction, was often futile. Despite all the training, all the discipline, and all the might of Roman engineering, battle is a chaotic, unpredictable beast. Sooner or later, you, or one of your comrades, will likely face the grim reality of wounds and Roman medicine. It's a stark contrast to modern healthcare, a blend of surprising advancements and truly terrifying limitations. Imagine the sharp, searing pain as a barbarian's sword glances off your lorica, but still leaves a deep gash on your exposed arm. Or perhaps an arrow, miraculously, finds its way between the plates of your armor, lodging itself painfully in your leg. Your first instinct would be to stop the bleeding, perhaps tearing a strip of cloth from your tunic or using a comrade's help to apply pressure. The shock would be immense, the adrenaline coursing through you masking some of the immediate pain. But soon, a dull, throbbing ache would set in, a constant reminder of your vulnerability. On the battlefield itself, initial care would be rudimentary. You'd likely be pulled back from the front line by a nearby comrade or a designated stretcher bearer, perhaps an ambulancier if such a formal role existed in your unit. Though this was often handled informally, your centurion would ensure you were removed, but the priority would always be maintaining the line. The focus in the immediate aftermath of an injury was usually on stopping major hemorrhaging. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman military surgeons, known as medici, were remarkably skilled for their time. They were part of the legion, organized into a medical corps, and possessed an impressive array of surgical instruments, some surprisingly similar to those used today. Once you were off the battlefield and back at the legion's camp, or a temporary field hospital set up nearby, the real work of the medicus would begin. You'd be taken to a valetudinarium, a purpose-built military hospital, often a permanent fixture in larger forts. Here, the conditions, while basic by modern standards, were far superior to most civilian medical care of the era. The Medici were trained not just in treating wounds, but also in hygiene. They understood the importance of boiling water to clean instruments, though they didn't know why it worked. They observed that it reduced infection. They would use vinegar or wine as antiseptics for cleaning wounds, a surprisingly effective measure against bacteria. Imagine the stinging sensation as they poured wine directly into your open wound. A crude but vital form of sterilization. For deep cuts or lacerations, the medicus would use needles and thread, often made from linen or even animal gut, to stitch wounds closed. If a limb was badly broken or gangrenous, amputation was a grim but often life-saving necessity. Imagine the agonizing pain, perhaps dulled slightly by opium or mandrake, ancient painkillers, but certainly not eliminated. A crude saw and a cauterizing iron, used to sear the stump closed to prevent bleeding, would be the instruments of your survival. You might joke, grimly, that the medicus was half surgeon, half butcher, but his skills could mean the difference between life and a slow, agonizing death. A quirky tidbit is that Roman doctors also performed eye surgery, tooth extractions, and even brain surgery trepanation, drilling holes in the skull for head injuries. Though the success rates for the latter were understandably low, they even had rudimentary prosthetic limbs, often simple wooden pegs, but they show an astonishing level of care for their wounded veterans. Recovery would be a long, painful process. Infections, despite the doctor's best efforts, were rampant, without antibiotics. Even a minor cut could turn fatal if it became infected. You'd likely be given herbal remedies for pain or fever, and a carefully monitored diet to aid healing. The psychological toll of these injuries, and the constant fear of being maimed or disabled, would weigh heavily on a soldier's mind. Historians still argue about the true survival rates of Roman soldiers from battlefield wounds, while their medical care was advanced for the time. The sheer brutality of ancient warfare meant that many injuries were simply unsurvivable, regardless of the physician's skill. You'd witness comrades succumb to their injuries, even after seemingly successful surgeries, a constant reminder of the fragility of life on the front lines. And as you slowly regained your strength, the scar on your body would serve as a permanent mark of your service, a grim badge of honor from the school of hard knocks that was the Roman legion. Having faced the brutal realities of Roman training, discipline, and the sheer terror of open combat, you come to understand that the enemy is not a monolithic entity. Rome's empire was vast, and across its sprawling borders, you would confront a dizzying array of foes, each with their own unique fighting styles, weaponry, and psychological approaches. This meant that every campaign brought a new, distinct challenge, forcing the legions to adapt their tactics. Imagine standing on the frigid northern frontier, the mist swirling around you as you face the fierce tribes of Germania. These weren't professional armies in the Roman sense. They were warriors driven by tribal loyalty and a ferocious, almost reckless, courage. Their primary weapons were often long, heavy spears and massive, two-handed swords designed for hacking and slashing. They fought in dense, undisciplined warbands, relying on sheer numerical superiority and a terrifying, guttural roar to unnerve their opponents. You'd learn to respect their ferocity, but also to exploit their lack of discipline. Their charges, while initially overwhelming, often lacked staying power, and a disciplined Roman line could absorb the initial shock, then methodically counterattack. Historians still argue about the precise tactics employed by Germanic tribes. Some suggest they used more organized formations than Roman sources let on. You might joke that facing a horde of screaming Germans was like trying to organize a particularly rowdy bar fight, but one where everyone had a very sharp axe. Then picture yourself in the scorching sands of the east, facing the formidable cavalry and archers of the Parthian Empire. This was a different beast entirely. The Parthians were masters of horseback warfare, renowned for their Parthian shot, feigning retreat, only to turn in the saddle and loose a volley of arrows with deadly accuracy. Their heavily armored cataphracts, armored horses and riders, were like ancient tanks, capable of shattering infantry lines. Roman tactics against the Parthians involved extensive use of their own archers and cavalry, and meticulous defensive formations. The testudo, which you've practiced relentlessly, would be vital against their ceaseless arrow fire. You'd learn the importance of digging in, creating defensive stakes to deter cavalry charges, and the frustrating reality of an enemy that often refused to stand and fight in a pitched battle. A quirky tidbit is that the Parthians sometimes used small, almost invisible barbed arrowheads designed to break off inside the wound, making them incredibly difficult to remove and causing agonizing pain. Further west, you might encounter the agile, iron-willed tribes of Britannia, fighting from their woad-painted chariots, or the well-drilled but often outmatched forces of other settled states in Gaul or Hispania. Each presented a unique tactical puzzle. The Britons, with their chariots, required the legions to spread out their formations slightly to avoid being outflanked, and to counter the psychological shock of the charging vehicles. You'd be trained to deal with different types of shields, different armor, and different psychological tactics. Some enemies would scream and charge, others might try to outmaneuver you. The key to Roman success against such diverse opposition lay in their adaptability, but more importantly, in their unwavering core strengths: discipline, superior organization, and logistics. While individual battles might be lost, Rome rarely lost a war. Your training prepared you not just for one type of enemy, but for the fundamental principles of combat that could be applied against any foe. You understood how to hold a line, how to advance under pressure, how to respond to flanking maneuvers, no matter if it was a charging Gallic chieftain, a Parthian horse archer, or a desert skirmisher. The Roman way was to absorb the shock, maintain cohesion, and then deliver a methodical, overwhelming counterattack. And as you fought in these distant lands, against these varied foes, you'd gain a profound appreciation for the immense diversity of the ancient world, and the consistent, grinding effort it took for Rome to remain its undisputed master. While the roar of battle and the clash of swords might dominate the tales, the true unsung heroes, and often the most critical factor in Roman military success, lay in the meticulous, often invisible, world of supply lines and logistics. A legion, no matter how disciplined or well-equipped, was utterly useless if it couldn't be fed, watered, and resupplied. You might joke that the Roman army marched on its stomach, and that stomach was supplied by an administrative nightmare. Imagine the sheer scale of it. A single legion could number around 5,000 men, plus thousands more in support personnel, cavalry, and auxiliaries. Each man needed food, water, and fodder for animals. They needed replacement weapons, armor repairs, medical supplies, tools for engineering, and materials for siegecraft. Moving this immense quantity of materiel across hundreds or even thousands of miles, often through hostile or underdeveloped territory, was an organizational feat bordering on the miraculous. Your daily march wasn't just about getting to the next objective, it was about maintaining the flow of supplies. You'd see long columns of supply wagons, sometimes stretching for miles, trundling behind the legions. These wagons would be laden with grain, dried meat, wine, and all the other necessities. Protecting these supply convoys from enemy raids was a constant concern, often requiring detachments of legionaries or auxiliaries to guard them. Losing a supply train could mean starvation, mutiny, or the collapse of an entire campaign. This is a mainstream historical fact. Roman military campaigns often succeeded or failed based on the strength of their logistical support. The Roman approach to logistics wasn't just about wagons, though. They understood the importance of infrastructure. Wherever the legions went, they built. This meant constructing roads, bridges, and even canals to facilitate the movement of troops and supplies. You would often find yourself assigned to a work party, pickaxe in hand, helping to clear forests, level ground, or lay down the foundations of a new road. These roads, famously straight and durable, weren't just for conquest. They were the arteries of the empire, allowing rapid movement of goods, information, and, crucially, reinforcements. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of Roman roads was military or economic, but their dual function undeniably contributed to the longevity and power of the empire. Water supply was another critical concern, especially in arid regions. You'd be part of digging wells or constructing temporary aqueducts to bring fresh water into camps. Imagine the desperation of a parched legion, and the immense relief when a fresh water source was secured. Beyond the basics of food and water, there was the constant need for equipment maintenance. Your gladius needed sharpening. Your lorica might need repairs. And your caligae would constantly wear out. Dedicated craftsmen, smiths, and cobblers would travel with the legion or be stationed in larger forts, ensuring that every piece of gear was in top condition. You might spend an evening in camp watching a smith repair a comrade's helmet, the sparks flying, a small moment of continuity in a world of constant motion. Then there's the unseen, but vital element of communication. Orders had to be transmitted rapidly and accurately across vast distances. This involved messengers, signaling systems like flags or smoke signals, and the careful relaying of information from the commander to the front lines. A missed message, a misinterpreted order, could have catastrophic consequences in battle or during a siege. A quirky tidbit is that Roman legions sometimes used carrier pigeons for rapid communication over short distances, particularly for scouting reports or urgent messages between detachments. Though this was less common than human messengers, the Roman army was a self-sufficient ecosystem, a microcosm of the empire itself, capable of sustaining itself in almost any environment. This logistical prowess allowed them to undertake campaigns far from their homeland, to conquer vast territories, and to maintain control over them for centuries, as you trudged along. A small part of that massive logistical chain, you'd gain a quiet appreciation for the unseen work that kept the mighty legions moving forward, conquering, and ultimately, enduring. Without the legions of engineers, quartermasters, and humble laborers, the glory of Rome would have been but a fleeting dream. While the clang of steel and the grim realities of the battlefield consume much of your daily existence, there were also fleeting moments of respite, glimpses into a life beyond the constant grind of soldiering. These small allowances, glimpses of normal human existence, were vital for maintaining morale and for reminding you that there was, eventually, an end to the endless campaigns. Pay was, of course, a primary motivator for many. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman soldiers received a regular salary, known as stipendium, though this was typically paid in 3 installments throughout the year, not weekly like a modern paycheck. You wouldn't be seeing all of it in your hand. Though, deductions were common, for food, for new equipment, even for a portion that was held in a legionary savings bank, ostensibly for your retirement bonus. So, while the promise of wealth was there, the reality was often a much smaller sum trickling into your possession. Imagine the frustration of knowing you're earning money, but most of it is being held back or immediately spent on necessities. Still, it was a steady income, often better than what you could earn as a peasant, and it offered a path to a more secure future, if you survived. When you did get your hands on some coin, what would you do on campaign? Opportunities were limited. Perhaps you'd engage in a bit of gambling with your tent mates. Despite it often being officially forbidden, rolling carved dice, betting on small trinkets or a share of rations, it was a way to pass the endless hours of downtime, a small rebellion against the rigid discipline. You might win a few coins, or lose a few, but the camaraderie and the brief thrill of chance were often the real reward. Or perhaps you'd barter for small luxuries from local traders who sometimes hovered around the fringes of the camp. A piece of fresh fruit, a small jug of local wine, or perhaps a trinket to send back home if you were lucky enough to find a reliable messenger. In more permanent forts or garrison towns, life could be a little less harsh. Here, you'd find small, informal markets springing up outside the camp walls, run by local merchants or even camp followers. This was where you might spend your actual stipendium. You could buy better food than the standard legionary fare, perhaps some local wine or beer, or even pay for the services of a local barber or a bathhouse. Imagine the simple pleasure of a hot bath after weeks or months without one, scrubbing away the grime and sweat of the march. It was a fleeting luxury, but one deeply appreciated. The presence of camp followers was also a reality. While officially discouraged or controlled, women, wives, prostitutes, laundresses, cooks would often follow the legions, providing services that the male-dominated military could not. This brought a semblance of domesticity, however informal, to the harsh realities of military life. You might joke, with a wry smile, that even a Roman soldier needed someone to mend his socks, or at least wash them. Historians still argue about the exact prevalence and official toleration of camp followers, as Roman sources tend to be silent or condemnatory. For some, the dream was to earn an honorable discharge and return to civilian life. After 20, later 25 years of service, a legionary could receive a generous retirement bonus, often a large sum of money or, more commonly, a plot of fertile land in a newly conquered or settled territory. This was the ultimate prize, the culmination of decades of hardship and risk. Imagine the conversations in the tent at night, whispering about the farm you'd buy, the family you'd raise, or the quiet life you'd lead far from the dust and blood of the frontier. It was the driving force for many, a light at the end of a very long, very dark tunnel. These moments of normalcy, however brief or infrequent, were what kept you human amidst the dehumanizing grind of military life. They were the small reminders of the world you were fighting for, a world of simple pleasures and future hopes, a stark contrast to the relentless discipline and the ever-present threat of death. And it was these scattered, precious moments that would sustain you, helping you to endure the hardships, and perhaps even to dream of that distant, peaceful retirement, as you endure the relentless cycle of marching, fighting, and enduring. You start to notice certain individuals within the ranks. Some are quiet, dependable, always there when you need them. Others possess a natural authority, a sharp mind for tactics, or an uncanny ability to inspire courage in the face of fear. For those with such qualities, the path of promotion and command lay open, offering a way out of the anonymity of the ranks and into a position of genuine power and responsibility. The most common route for a promising legionary was to become a centurion. This wasn't merely a step up, it was a profound shift in status and duty. A centurion commanded a centuria of around 80 men despite the name meaning 100, and was the backbone of the Roman army. These were the grizzled veterans, often illiterate but incredibly experienced, who had fought their way up through sheer merit and courage. Imagine the respect, and sometimes the terror, they commanded. You'd see them leading from the front, in the thick of the fighting, a stark contrast to some modern officers who might direct from afar. A mainstream historical fact is that centurions were easily identifiable by the transverse crest on their helmet and the vites, a vine staff, which they used not just as a symbol of authority, but also to deliver swift discipline to errant soldiers. You might joke that the vites was the original tough love implement. To become a centurion, you needed to demonstrate not just bravery, but leadership, tactical awareness, and an unshakable resolve. It involved being noticed by your superior officers, perhaps a tribune, or even the legionary legate himself, for exceptional performance in battle or during training. The pay was significantly better, and the prestige was immense, but so too were the risks. Centurions had the highest casualty rates among officers, a testament to their position at the very heart of the fighting. They were expected to lead, inspire, and often die for their men. Beyond the rank of centurion, further promotions were possible, though increasingly rare, and often required a noble birth or political connections back in Rome. You might see a highly distinguished centurion ascend to the rank of primus pilus, the senior centurion of the first cohort, holding immense influence within the legion. Then came the tribunes, typically young men from senatorial or equestrian families, serving their military apprenticeship. They often lacked the practical experience of the centurions, but provided the strategic and administrative oversight. They might be a bit green, but their potential for higher command was clear. Historians still argue whether some tribunes, particularly in the later empire, were truly effective military leaders or primarily political appointees. At the very top of the legionary hierarchy was the legionary legate, usually a senator of considerable experience and authority. directly commanding the entire legion. This was the general, the man whose strategic decisions could lead to glorious victory or utter defeat. For you, a humble legionary, he would be a distant, almost mythical figure, seen perhaps only during formal parades or crucial pre-battle addresses. The responsibilities of command were immense. A centurion was responsible not just for leading his men in battle, but for their training, discipline, welfare, and even their judicial punishment. Imagine having the power of life and death, literally, over the men under your command, alongside the heavy burden of ensuring their survival. The psychological pressure must have been immense. A quirkier tidbit about promotion is that sometimes, even a regular legionary could be temporarily assigned a command role if a centurion was killed or incapacitated in battle, a testament to the Roman military's reliance on practical leadership. You'd step up, take the standard, and bark orders, hoping your training would kick in and that your comrades would follow. The path to command was one of brutal selection, where only the most capable, the most courageous, and the most politically savvy rose through the ranks. It was a world of immense responsibility and even greater peril, where a single miscalculation could lead to the demise of hundreds of men. But for those who seized the opportunity, it offered not just status and wealth, but the chance to shape history itself, to leave their indelible mark on the vast tapestry of the Roman Empire. And as you watched a centurion barking orders, or a tribune surveying the battlefield, you might, just for a moment, entertain the thought of wielding such power yourself, knowing full well the heavy price it came with. After years, perhaps even decades, of relentless service, enduring countless marches, brutal battles, and the pervasive threat of disease, a Roman soldier would eventually face the prospect of their honorable discharge, the honesta missio. This was the ultimate prize, the light at the end of a very long, very arduous tunnel, the veteran's return. But the transition back to civilian life, while eagerly anticipated, was often far from simple. Imagine the day it finally arrives. You've served your 20 or more, likely 25 years. You've seen comrades fall, empires rise and crumble, and you've contributed your very lifeblood to the expansion and defense of Rome. The ceremony would be modest but meaningful. You'd receive your formal discharge papers, perhaps a small certificate, a testament to your loyal service, and crucially, you'd receive your retirement bonus. A mainstream historical fact is that this bonus, often a significant sum of money, a large lump sum or a pension for life, or, more commonly, a plot of land, was typically a major incentive for enlistment and a means to ensure a stable veteran population. For many, this land grant would be in a newly conquered or pacified territory, often a frontier province where Roman influence was still solidifying. So, you, a grizzled veteran, perhaps with scars adorning your body and stories etched into your soul, are now a landowner. You might be settled in a Roman colony, a newly established town designed for veterans, where you'd find other former soldiers, creating a ready-made community of individuals who understood the unique experiences you shared. This could be a blessing, a brotherhood forged in the crucible of war. Continuing in peacetime, you might joke that even in retirement, you're still part of a unit, just with more comfortable footwear and less yelling. But the challenges of reintegration were immense. You had spent the majority of your adult life within the rigid, hierarchical structure of the military. Civilian life, with its varied laws, its chaotic markets, and its different social customs, could be a jarring adjustment. You were used to waking at dawn to the centurion's bark, not the crow of a rooster. You were accustomed to the simple, often brutal, certainties of military law, not the complex nuances of civilian courts. Historians still argue whether the integration of veterans into Roman society was consistently successful, or if many struggled with civilian life, particularly those who bore the physical and psychological scars of war. If your land grant was on a frontier, you weren't just a farmer, you were also a Roman presence, a living symbol of Rome's dominion. You might still be called upon to help defend your community against raiders or to assist in maintaining order, Your military skills, honed over decades, wouldn't simply vanish. You'd be a respected figure in your local community, perhaps serving in local government, or helping to train a new generation of local militia. A quirky tidbit is that some veteran colonies were so well established that they even had their own small amphitheaters for entertainment, a familiar piece of Roman culture replicated on the frontier. For those who didn't receive land, or chose not to farm, opportunities were varied. Your skills in engineering, administration, or simply your disciplined nature might find you work in public service, as a policeman, a tax collector, or overseeing construction projects. Your military pension, while perhaps not making you rich, would provide a degree of financial security. However, for those with severe injuries or psychological trauma from their service, the lack of modern support systems meant a far grimmer existence. Ultimately, the veterans' return was a testament to the Roman system's ability to both create formidable soldiers and then, largely, integrate them back into society. You might miss the camaraderie of the legion, the simple clarity of purpose, but the quiet satisfaction of owning your own land, building a family, and living out your days in peace would be a reward beyond measure. It was the promise that fueled every march, every battle, and every moment of hardship, the dream of finally laying down your sword and embracing the hard-won peace you had helped to forge. Having witnessed the individual journey of the Roman soldier, from recruit to veteran, it's time to step back and consider the monumental impact of these legions. Their relentless efficiency and organizational brilliance weren't just about winning battles. They fundamentally shaped the ancient world, leaving an indelible mark on history that reverberates even today. These were the legacies of war, etched into the very fabric of civilization. The most obvious legacy is, of course, the sheer expansion of the Roman Empire. Imagine the vastness of it, from the cold wilds of Britannia to the scorching deserts of North Africa, from the Atlantic coast to the Mesopotamian plains. This immense territory was not merely conquered, it was held by the disciplined might of the legions. Every road built, every fort established, every frontier defended was a testament to their enduring presence. They were the primary instrument of Rome's dominion, carving out an empire unprecedented in its scale and longevity. A mainstream historical fact is that at its peak, the Roman Empire encompassed approximately 5 million square kilometers, an area roughly the size of modern Europe. You might joke that the Roman army was the original real estate empire, always expanding its portfolio. But the legions brought more than just conquest. They were also agents of Romanization, wherever they went. Roman culture, language Latin, laws, and customs followed. Veterans settled in new colonies, bringing their Roman ways of life to distant lands. Roads, built for military movement, became arteries for trade and cultural exchange. You'd see temples, bathhouses, and amphitheaters springing up in newly conquered territories, transforming local populations into Roman citizens. This wasn't always a gentle process, often enforced by the very steel of your gladius. But its long-term impact was undeniable. Historians still argue whether Romanization was a benevolent process of civilizing barbarians or a brutal imposition of foreign culture. Think about the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For nearly 2 centuries, vast swathes of the empire experienced unparalleled stability and prosperity. This wasn't achieved through diplomacy alone. It was maintained by the omnipresent threat and swift action of the legions. Your presence on the frontier, your readiness to march and fight, ensured that internal rebellions were crushed and external threats deterred. It was a peace built on the sharp edge of a sword, but a peace nonetheless, allowing for the flourishing of trade, art, and intellectual pursuits within the empire's secure borders. Imagine the pride you might feel, knowing your daily grind contributed to such an era of stability. The influence of the Roman military extends far beyond geographical boundaries. Many aspects of modern military organization and engineering owe a direct debt to Roman practices. The concept of a standing army, standardized training, logistical networks, military engineering like bridge building and fortifications, and even ranks and unit structures can trace their lineage back to the Roman legions. When you see a modern army building a temporary bridge or setting up a field hospital, You're witnessing the distant echo of Roman ingenuity. A quirky tidbit is that even the modern salute, with its origins debated, has been linked by some theories to Roman practices of raising a hand to show it was empty and held no weapon. Furthermore, the legions shaped the very political landscape of Rome itself. They were not just instruments of the state, they were powerful political actors. Loyalties of legions could determine emperors, and their demands for land or pay could sway political decisions. The relationship between the army and the emperor was a delicate balance, often leading to civil wars as ambitious generals leveraged their legions for personal power. You, as a soldier, were a small piece in this grand political game, your actions potentially having consequences far beyond the battlefield. So, as you reflect on your time in the Roman army, you come to understand that you were part of something far greater than yourself. You were a living, breathing component of a force that fundamentally altered the course of human history, spreading Roman power, culture, and order across the known world. The dust you kicked up on countless marches, the blood you shed on countless battlefields, it all contributed to a legacy that continued to shape the world long after your caligae were hung up for good. And in that vast sweep of history, your small, individual struggle became a part of the grand, enduring narrative of Rome. After a lifetime of service, after witnessing the rise and fall of enemies, the expansion of empires, and the relentless march of history, there comes a time for the final rest. For the Roman soldier, the grim reality of battle meant that this final repose often came abruptly, violently, and far from home. This is a reflection on the soldier's final rest, a quiet, somber moment amidst the grand narrative of conquest. If you fell in battle, your death would likely be swift and brutal, perhaps a thrust from an enemy sword, a crushing blow from a club, or a hail of arrows. There would be no last words, no dramatic farewells, just the sudden, overwhelming cessation of existence. Your body might lie where it fell, amidst the carnage, until the battle ended. If your comrades prevailed, efforts would often be made to recover the fallen. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman armies typically collected their dead after a battle, often burying them in mass graves or cremation pits near the battlefield, sometimes marking the location with simple monuments. This was not just out of respect, but also for sanitation and to prevent disease. Imagine the grim task of identifying friends amidst the fallen, a silent, heartbreaking roll call of those who wouldn't be returning. For those who died on campaign from disease, a far more common killer than combat, the end might be a slow, debilitating decline in the valetudinarium. You'd waste away, surrounded by other sick and dying men, far from the comforts of home. Your final moments might be in a fevered delirium, dreaming of green fields or a familiar face. Burial would be utilitarian, a simple grave dug by your comrades, perhaps marked with a basic wooden marker. No grand ceremonies, just the quiet turning of earth. You might joke, with grim humor, that at least the worms would appreciate your contribution to the empire. However, for those who survived their service, the final rest was often a return to the land they had helped secure. As a veteran, you might live out your days on your plot of land, watching seasons change, your body slowly succumbing to age or old wounds. Your passing would be a more peaceful affair, surrounded by family or the community of fellow veterans you had helped establish. Your grave, while perhaps modest, would likely be cared for by your descendants or your community. The Roman concept of death and the afterlife was complex, blending traditional Roman beliefs with Greek influences. Many believed in an underworld, a realm of shades, where the spirits of the dead resided. Soldiers, particularly those who died gloriously in battle, were often thought to earn a more favorable passage to the afterlife, their courage granting them a form of immortality. Gravestones, when they existed, often depicted the deceased in military garb, highlighting their service and valor. A quirky tidbit is that some Roman funerary inscriptions for soldiers included their entire military career, acting as a kind of ancient resume, ensuring their service was remembered. Historians still argue about the precise rituals and beliefs surrounding Roman military funerals, as practices varied greatly across time and region. However, the consistent theme was one of remembrance and honor for those who had sacrificed for Rome. Their names, even if only on a simple marker, were meant to endure, a permanent testament to their contribution. As the sun sets on your journey through the life of a Roman soldier, you are left with a profound appreciation for the human element within that legendary war machine. You've walked in their caligae, felt the weight of their lorica, and tasted the fear and triumph of their battles. You've seen their discipline, their resilience, and their surprising humanity amidst the brutality. The individual soldier, in all his ordinary and extraordinary moments, was the beating heart of an empire that shaped the world. And as you finally close your eyes, you carry with you the silent, enduring memory of the Roman legionary, a figure of strength, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty, forever etched into the annals of time. The air in your room grows still now, the faint sounds of the night settling around you, the distant echoes of marching legions, the clash of gladi, the commands of stern centurions, they all begin to fade, dissolving back into the quiet hum of history, the dust of ancient roads, the chill of frontier outposts, the warmth of a shared campfire. They are but faint whispers on the edges of your awareness. Let the weight of that distant past, the lives lived and lost, gently recede from your mind. Your own bed is soft, your blankets are warm, and the only sounds now are those of your quiet breathing. There's nothing more to do, nowhere else to be. Just rest, let your mind drift, free from the burdens of legions and empires. All the struggles and triumphs of those long-ago soldiers have come to their own peaceful conclusion. You are safe, here and now. Just let go. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.